Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, well, we've got some really fascinating material you sent over, some bits from 10 bizarre coincidences, fate, chance, and mystery. And honestly, some of these stories are just mind-bending. So our plan is to really dig into these stories, use your source as our map. We want to explore that weird, blurry area between pure chance, maybe fate, and, well, how our brains love finding patterns. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah,
Because these aren't just small coincidences, are they? They feel bigger.
they really do. And what's so interesting, looking at it through the lens of your source, is how they hit on something really core to us as humans. This need we have to make sense of things, to find meaning, and to ask, is this random or is there some bigger picture we're missing? Coincidence really shakes that up.
It absolutely does. And this source material is just packed with examples. Some you might know, others maybe less so, but wow, they all make you think. Where should we start? Maybe with that one that feels almost like a warning from the past. Yeah, let's look at Morgan Robertson, his novella from 1898, Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan.
Right. And this came out, 14 years before the Titanic even sailed? Robertson wrote about this huge, super luxurious ship, the Titan, supposedly unsinkable.
And in the story, this unsinkable ship hits an iceberg. North Atlantic.
In April.
Goes down. Huge loss of life, mainly because...
Not enough lifeboats. Exactly. Now put that right next to the actual RMS Titanic in 1912, also called Unsinkable. Biggest ship of its day. Sank in April, North Atlantic, hit an iceberg, starboard side.
And the details, according to your source, they just keep stacking up.
Yeah.
Both ships, roughly 800 feet long, similar speeds, like 25 knots, both designed for around 3,000 people.
And that critical point, the massive loss of life in both the book and reality, directly linked to not having enough lifeboats. Even the coordinates where they sank are apparently incredibly close.
Eerie.
Well, yeah. And the source digs into this tension. Was Robertson just smart? Looking at shipbuilding trends, knowing icebergs were a danger, ships were getting bigger.
Right, sort of extrapolating.
Or does it hint at something stranger, like precognition? Or maybe tapping into some kind of collective knowledge pool, what Jung later called the collective unconscious.
But the skeptics, and the source mentions this too, they'd say, look, it's probability, big ship, unsinkable hype, North Atlantic ice fields. A disaster isn't that unlikely, statistically.
No, absolutely. But it's the sheer number of those really specific matching details that makes this one stick around, The insight here isn't just about the prediction, it's how fiction, just pure imagination, could mirror a real tragedy so closely. Makes you really question the line between, stories and reality, and maybe it's a reminder about hubris, too.
Definitely. Okay, from a disaster at sea to something maybe even more unsettling personally. That story about identity. The Jim twins, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer.
Yeah, this one's a classic in psychology circles. Identical twins, born 1940, separated basically at birth, adopted by different families in Ohio, didn't even know the other existed until they were 39, met in 1979.
And the parallels in their lives are just staggering. Okay, first off, both sets of adoptive parents completely independently named their kid James.
Right. And then both Jims married a woman named Linda, both got divorced, both then remarried women named Betty.
It keeps going. Both named their first son James Allen. Okay, slight spelling difference on the Allen, but still.
Yeah.
Both had a childhood dog named Toy.
And it wasn't just names. Their lives ran in these weird parallel tracks. Both ended up working in security, one a sheriff's deputy, the other a security guard. Both loved woodworking as a hobby. Both drove the same model, Chevy.
Smoked the same cigarettes, Salem's, right?
Yeah.
Even vacationed to the same little beach down in Florida.
And your source adds the physical stuff beyond just looking alike. Both got tension headaches, both bit their fingernails. It's almost overwhelming when you list it all out.
So what's the thinking here? Genetics gone wild.
Well, it became a huge piece of evidence for the nature side of the nature versus nurture debate, especially in that Minnesota study by Dr. Bouchard. The idea being maybe our genes determine a lot more than just eye color, maybe personality, tastes, life choices too. Sort of genetic determinism.
But hang on, the source also brings up the counter-argument, right? Like,
What?
maybe we're just focusing on the hits and ignoring the misses. Cherry picking.
Exactly. Or that, growing up in mid-century Ohio, maybe the options weren't that wide. Certain cars were popular, certain jobs common. Could some overlap just be normal for the time and place?
Maybe, but that many overlaps.
It's hard to dismiss easily, yeah. The real insight from the Jim twins, as your source frames it, is how dramatically they force us to confront that nature-nurture question. How much of us is already written in our DNA before we even experience the world? It's a profound question.
Okay, sticking with intertwined lives, let's tackle maybe the most famous one, the one everyone seems to have heard bits of, the Lincoln-Kennedy parallels.
Ah, yes, the big one. And your source does a good job laying out the common points, but also, importantly, flagging the ones that are a bit shaky.
Okay, let's do the solid ones first. Both elected president 100 years apart. Lincoln 1860, Kennedy 1960.
Right, both heavily involved in civil rights issues during really difficult time.
Both assassinated on a Friday. Shot in the head.
Yeah.
Their wives were right there with them.
Correct. And both were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, born 1808 after Lincoln. Lyndon Johnson, born 1908 after Kennedy. Another uncanny 100-year gap in the birth years.
Now, the source brings up some more specific, maybe weirder details. Lincoln shot in Ford's theater. Kennedy shot in a Lincoln car made by Ford.
And then there's that story you always hear. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy who warned him not to go to the theater, and Kennedy had a secretary named Evelyn Lincoln who warned him about Dallas.
But the source says, hold on a minute with the first part, no proof Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy.
Exactly. That seems to be something added later, maybe to make the pattern even neater. It fits that pattern-seeking thing we do.
Okay. But some other details do check out, like the assassins, Booth and Oswald, both known by 3 names, 15 letters total.
That part's true. And both assassins were killed before trial. Both presidents had 4 children, lost one while living in the White House. Those are factual parallels.
So it's this weird mix, some incredible, verifiable parallels, and some bits that feel like folklore tacked on.
Precisely. And the insight your source offers isn't just listing them, it's asking why this particular set of coincidences resonates so strongly. It shows our powerful need to find order, especially after national trauma, and how easily facts can get blended with, well, appealing additions. Is there a genuine deep pattern, or are we just really good at connecting dots, maybe even drawing lines where there aren't any?
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift from presidents to comic strips. This one was lighter, but still really strange. The 2 Dennis the Menaces.
Yeah, this is just bizarre. 2 different artists, one in the US, one in the UK, create totally separate comic strips. Both feature a kid named Dennis the Menace, and both comics debut on the exact same day, March 12th, 1951.
You got Hank Ketchum's Dennis in the US, blonde kid, always bothering poor Mr. Wilson.
And then David Law's Dennis in the UK, darker hair, bit more of a rebel, slingshot, his dog Gnasher. Both became huge cultural figures in their own countries.
And the source makes a point. When they found out about each other, the lawyers looked into it. No copying. Just happened. Independently.
Total parallel creation. It's often used as an example of multiple discovery. Like sometimes an idea is just in the air. The source suggests maybe the post-war baby boom created this cultural focus on naughty kids, sparking similar ideas separately.
Or is it just a 1 in a billion fluke with the name and the date?
That's the question, isn't it? The insight here, from the source's perspective, is about creativity. Is it always unique? Or do certain ideas just ripen at the same time in different places? It kind of hints at this unseen cultural connection.
Okay, from comics to something much older, much darker. That curse story. Tamerlane's tomb in World War II.
Right. Tamerlane, the 14th century conqueror. His tomb in Samarkand supposedly had this inscription: "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Pretty ominous.
And despite warnings, Soviet archaeologists went ahead and opened it. June 1941.
And literally 2 days later, June 22nd, 1941, Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union, arguably unleashing an invader far more terrible, at least in terms of immediate scale and brutality.
The timing is just
Wow.
chilling.
Your source adds that local elders apparently begged the Soviets not to do it, and once the invasion started, those curse rumors definitely flew.
And wasn't there something about Stalin getting worried, ordering the remains reburied later?
Yes, reportedly. Tamerlane was reburied with full Islamic honors in November 1942. And remarkably, just weeks after that, the Soviets win the Battle of Stalingrad, the massive turning point on the Eastern Front.
Whoa. Curse confirmed.
Well, your source leans more towards skepticism. Suggests the story likely got amplified after the invasion started, playing on existing fears. Hindsight bias, maybe. But it does acknowledge the timing is incredibly striking.
So the insight isn't necessarily about the curse itself.
Not really validating curses, no. It's more about the psychological power of these legends, how belief, superstition, fear, how these things can intersect with huge historical events in ways that feel meaningful, even if you can't prove a direct causal link. It makes you wonder how much history is shaped not just by decisions and battles, but by what people believe.
From ancient conquerors to one very, very lucky or maybe protected woman, Violet Jessup, The unsinkable stewardess.
Yeah, her story is amazing. She worked for the White Star Line right when their biggest ships were having major problems. And she survived 3 of those incidents.
Okay, first up, 1911, she's on the RMS Olympic. It collides with a warship, the HMS Hawk. Badly damaged, but it didn't sink. She was okay.
Then the big one, 1912, she's a stewardess on the Titanic, gets into lifeboat 16, survives the sinking. Your source adds that little detail about her lifeboat later pulling the chief baker, Charles Groven, out of the water, the guy who supposedly stayed warm with whiskey.
Right. And then number 3, World War I, 1916. She's a nurse on the HMHS Britannic, Titanic's sister ship, being used as a hospital ship, hits a mine, sinks fast.
And she survives that too. Jumped from a lifeboat, actually got pulled towards the ship's propellers, suffered a head injury, but survived.
3 major disasters involving sister ships, and she walks away each time. And then just kept working at sea.
Yeah.
Lived into her 80s.
Incredible. The source frames it as this extreme example. Was it unbelievable luck? Was she just incredibly resilient and quick thinking in crises? Or does it feel like something
More. Like she was protected somehow. Or just beat impossible odds repeatedly.
The insight is how one person's life story can just defy our sense of probability. It makes you ask, where do statistics end and something else begin? Is it fate? Is it just mind-boggling chance? Her life really highlights that blurry line.
Okay, let's go back to fiction mirroring reality. This one's also pretty dark. Edgar Allan Poe. His novel from 1838, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym.
Yeah, a really grim book. And there's a part where shipwrecked sailors draw lots to decide who gets, eaten. Cannibalism. And the unlucky victim in the story is a young guy named Richard Parker.
Okay, hold that thought. Now jump forward to 1884. Real life. A yacht called the Mignonette sinks. 4 survivors in a lifeboat, starving. They decide they have to kill the cabin boy to survive. And his name.
Richard Parker.
Unbelievable. And your source adds that the real Richard Parker was 17, an orphan. Similar to the character Poe described.
That's the detail that makes it even stranger. This wasn't just some obscure event either. The real case, Regina v. Dudley and Stevens, became a huge legal landmark about necessity as a defense for murder.
Did the real survivors know Poe's book?
They apparently denied it, said they'd never heard of it.
So what's the explanation? Jungian synchronicity again. A meaningful coincidence.
Or the more mundane explanation. Maybe Richard Parker was just a really common name for sailors or cabin boys back then, making it a grim but statistically possible overlap. The insight your source draws is about this unsettling resonance between stories and reality. Does life imitate art sometimes in ways that feel too specific to be random? Or are we just wired to notice these connections, especially when they're this macabre?
Heavy stuff.
Okay.
Let's shift to something symbolic, tied to American history. The deaths of Adams and Jefferson.
John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, 2 absolute giants of the American founding. Signed the Declaration, rivals in politics, then friends again later in life through letters.
And they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826.
Exactly 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence was signed. Died within hours of each other, miles apart.
And your source mentions Adams's supposed last words. Thomas Jefferson's survives, not knowing Jefferson had already passed.
Poignant, isn't it? Whether it's completely accurate or slightly embellished, it adds to the mythos. There's also historical discussion, mentioned in the source, that maybe, just maybe, they held on deliberately for that anniversary. And then, weirdly, James Monroe, another founder, 5th president, he also died on July 4th, just 5 years later in 1831.
The odds of Adams and Jefferson dying on that specific date, the 50th anniversary, must be astronomical.
Absolutely, Tiny. Your source doesn't push a supernatural angle, but focuses on the incredible symbolism. Could humanity play a role? Does it suggest some deeper link between personal lives and national milestones?
The insight feels like it's about how history sometimes gives us these moments that feel almost scripted. So perfectly symbolic, they make you wonder about will, destiny, and maybe these profound alignments between individuals and the sweep of history.
Right. Here's another one tied to history, but on a much more personal, almost accidental level. Wilmer McLean, the guy whose houses bookended the Civil War.
Ah, yes. Poor Wilmer McLean, just a regular farmer in Virginia who had the strangest connection to the war. So the very first major battle, first Bull Run, or Manassas, July 1861. It basically happens on his farm. Cannonballs literally landing in his yard.
Understandably, he thinks, I need to get away from this. So he moves his family south, about 120 miles, to a place he thinks will be quiet and out of the way, Appomattox Courthouse.
Famous last words, right? Because fast forward to April 9th, 1865, the end of the war. General Lee needs to surrender to General Grant. And where do they end up holding the official surrender meeting?
In Wilmer McLean's front parlor, in his new house at Appomattox.
He really did say it, didn't he? The war began in my front yard and ended in my front parlor. Your source points out it wasn't planned. Grant's guys just needed a decent place and picked his house kind of randomly.
It's such a perfect, ironic encapsulation of how war disrupts ordinary lives.
Yeah, the insight there, as the source puts it, is how McLean just accidentally becomes this symbol, how sheer chance can put someone right at the center of huge historical moments and makes you think about destiny versus randomness and maybe how you can't really escape history when it's happening all around you. Okay, our last story from your source. And this one is, well, it's chilling, really specific and localized. The identical taxi tragedies in Bermuda from the 70s, right?
Yes. This sounds like urban legend, but it was apparently reported by the police there. A young man riding his moped in Bermuda is hit by a taxi and killed. A terrible tragedy.
Then, exactly 1 year later, his brother, riding the very same moped on the same street, reportedly at the very same intersection,
Is hit and killed by the same taxi, driven by the same taxi driver. And get this, the source claims the taxi was even carrying the same passenger who had been in the cab during the first accident a year before.
Okay, that's just deeply weird. Same street, same moped, same taxi, same driver, same passenger. 1 year apart, brothers.
The source really stresses those specific details. It says it baffled the local police, made news internationally because it just seemed too improbable to be true.
It feels less like chance and more like, I don't even know what, fate. A curse.
Well, the statistical argument, as always, is that given enough time, enough people, enough events worldwide, even incredibly unlikely things will happen somewhere. The 1 in a billion event isn't impossible, just rare.
But does that feel like enough for this exact set of circumstances repeating?
And that's the crux of it, isn't it? The insight your source takes from this deeply unsettling story is how it pushes our understanding of probability right to the edge. It makes us instinctively reach for other explanations, destiny, patterns, something beyond just random dice rolls. It highlights that human need to find meaning, especially when tragedy repeats itself in such an uncanny, specific way.
So we've gone through quite a journey here. Prophetic books, identical twins, historical echoes, parallel comics, curses, impossible survival, deadly namesakes, symbolic deaths, wartime bookends, and that final, really disturbing taxi story. Your source has laid out some truly strange moments where reality just seems glitchy.
Exactly, and that final reflection in your source sums it up nicely. These stories don't give us neat answers, they challenge us. Are we just amazing pattern-finding machines, seeing connections after the fact, imposing stories onto randomness?
Or do these weird alignments maybe hint at something else? Hidden connections, synchronicities, a universe that's maybe more interconnected, more mysterious than we usually think.
They leave you hanging, in a way, in that space of wonder. After going through all these from your source, what really sticks with you? Is it the universe just rolling incredibly specific dice? Or our minds desperately trying to find shapes in the chaos?
Your source offered that final thought. Maybe the point isn't proving fate or disproving chance. Maybe the magic is just in the wondering. How these events make us stop, question everything, and imagine maybe there are unseen threads connecting things in ways we haven't figured out yet. Makes you wonder what other bizarre coincidences are out there just waiting to happen, right? Well, thank you so much for sending over the material that let us take this really fascinating deep dive. Join us next time as we explore another intriguing topic.